Hi there, students. I'm XS. That's little x, little s, which stands for extra sweet, because that's what I am. I'm a Puppy-sensei, and I make Japanese content to help you level up your Japanese language skills. If you've been following along carefully with my Grammar Drop series, today may feel a little bit redundant to you. Today we're going to talk about kore, sore, are, and dore. I already did a lesson specifically on koko, doko, and asoko, but I want to touch on some of these ideas again by talking specifically about the pronouns kore, sore, are, and dore, which we can translate as something like this, these, those, that thing over there, or which. Let's look at some natural language examples using these forms, and we'll talk a little bit about their use. これは私の植物です. This is the very most basic use of this sentence structure, right? So, これは would translate basically to something like this is. More or less, you can then put just about any noun in the slot that exists between the これは and the des. So, in the previous sentence, we had これは私の植物です. But we can take out that 私の植物 and we can replace it with something like 彼女のカバン. So, これは彼女のカバンです. This is the girl's bag. Or, これはゼブラです. This is a zebra. Or, これは意外に難しい例文です. This is an unexpectedly difficult example sentence. It's really not. What all of these sentences have in common is that これ must be referencing something that is kind of within your sphere of influence. これ translates to this. And therefore, the particular object or idea that you're discussing should be something that's basically at hand for you. It's close to you. Usually, it's close enough that you can either grab it or touch it, or at least point to it. Now, obviously, that's also a matter of scope, isn't it? Right? For example, let's consider this sentence. これは銀河です. So, under what circumstance does the sentence, this is the Milky Way, make any sense at all, right? It's a perfectly grammatical sentence, but we're using kore here, and can you grab hold of the Milky Way? Probably not. And yet, we're still very likely to use this sentence if, for example, maybe an alien from the Andromeda Galaxy showed up at your doorstep and said, "Help, I don't know what galaxy I'm in." Okay, admittedly, that's not very likely, but that's not the point. The point is that we can use kore to talk about objects within our sphere of influence relative to someone else's sphere of influence, right? So our sphere of influence is that we're in the Milky Way, and some alien sphere of reference is that they're outside the Milky Way, or that they shouldn't be in the Milky Way, or something like that, right? Remember, Japanese thrives on context. So, given an appropriate level of context, this sentence is both grammatically and semantically sound. We've previously discussed the way that the KSA type sounds work in Japanese, but here's a quick refresher. Those K-type pronouns and nouns are close to me, the speaker. The S-type pronouns and nouns are closer to you, the listener. And the A-type pronouns and sounds are far away from both of us. They're not near either one of us. And therefore, it only stands to reason that we could give a definition of kore as this thing or these things that are close to me in some way. And then sore would be that thing or those things that are near you, or maybe that thing that you're holding, something like that. And that leaves are to mean that those are things that are far away from both of us. So it's that over there, those things far from us both. Whatever we're talking about, it's not really within either one of our reaches. Please watch out for this little point though. Remember when we learned koko, soko, and asoko? Well, it should be are, not asore. A lot of students think that because here, there, and over there are koko, soko, and asoko, that kore, sore, and are should follow the exact same pattern. And so they end up trying to fit that S sound in the middle of are in some way. To my knowledge, asore isn't really a Japanese word at all, and even if it were, it's not. It wouldn't mean something like that thing over there away from both of us. Now, there's one more piece of the puzzle that I want to uncover here, and that's dore. So let's look at this sentence. Kyoto eki wa dore desu ka? Dore follows the same pattern as kore, sore, and are. But rather than acting as a pronoun for a known item that's being referenced, it instead stands for some unknown item. So we can translate that as which or what one. This is by necessity going to need to come into the structure of a question, right? Because which is always going to be a question word. So, does it really matter if the item that you're seeking confirmation on with dore is near you, near the speaker, or not close to either one of us? You're looking for an answer, and the truth is, you might not know where that item is. In the case of the sentence that I'm giving you here, right? Kyoto eki wa dore desu ka? We could think of two really good scenarios where you're really likely to use this sentence. So the first scenario, maybe you're pointing to a map. That map could be very close to you and also close to the listener. And maybe you're hoping that based on your question, the listener will answer your question by specifically pointing to a stop on the map, right? And so that kind of corresponds to kore because it's right there, you can touch it. But you might also use a sentence like this in a case where maybe you're on a train and you don't know which stop to take. So maybe you're talking to the ticket taker and you say, Kyoto eki wa dore desu ka? Which one is the stop for Kyoto? In that case, there's nothing to point at, there's nothing to grab. You may not even know how far you are from Kyoto Station at all. And in a case like that, we can see why it's really important that dore is nebulous in regard to its proximity to both speaker and listener, right? So it doesn't really matter if it's close to you, close to them, close to neither of you, because you're seeking confirmation on something. To provide another example that demonstrates this nebulousness, osusume wa dore desu ka? This is a request for information. It's a request for someone's recommendation on something. Now, in order for this sentence to make any sense whatsoever, you really need context, right? Because if you just say out of the blue, what do you recommend? But there's no context, right? Then what are you talking about? What do you mean, what do you recommend? Do you mean food? Do you mean like activities? We have no idea. We have to have context for some kind of situation, right? You're going to need to know what specifically has already been discussed, or at a minimum, you need to have some kind of visual reference to point at. Maybe it's a menu, so you hold up a menu and you say, osusume wa dore desu ka? Right? Which of these things do you recommend? And at least in that case, someone can recognize you're talking about the menu, you want a food recommendation, right? That's the only way that you'll be able to get a recommendation out of this sentence. But this could also be a recommendation for an event. And in the case like that, there's nothing for you to point to because you're discussing a concept and not a physical object. As long as you already have established some previously kind of talked about idea within the conversation, it should be easy to work out the meaning, even with a sentence that's very nebulous, like osusume wa dore desu ka? Ne? Okay, for example, right, I have this little dialogue here where Puppy Kohai and Manager Sama are having a little conversation. So Puppy Kohai is saying, Kanshi, shikoku e ikimasu. And then Manager Sama is responding, Sige, shikoku de takusan jinja arun. And we have Puppy Kohai then asking this question, osusume wa dore desu ka? In this little dialogue, what we're seeing is Puppy Kohai and Manager Sama first establishing a topic of conversation. That topic is the shrines in Shikoku, right? so that when ultimately Puppy Kohai asks the question, "Osusume wa dore desu ka?" it makes sense that what they're asking for are recommendations of shrines in Shikoku rather than things like ramen toppings or skirts, right? We've established a baseline for conversation, we know exactly what we're talking about, and as a result, when the question, "What do you recommend?" is asked, we know that based on the previous parts of the conversation, it's about shrines in Shikoku. Yeah? So basically, that's it, right? We've got kore meaning this, sore meaning that, are meaning that over there, and dore meaning which. I know this is a little bit of an elementary lesson, but I think it's really good to brush up on these things for the benefit of our memories. Anyway, I'll see you next week. Mata raishu!